I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you all for joining us. We have a very exciting topic to discuss tonight with friend of show, Daniel Bessner. But before we start, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly doing cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Also, if you would like to further support the channel, for our patrons, we have the exclusive Champagne Room, where we have more zany, uncensored fun, usually watching some weird movies that get the show demonetized. Will that happen tonight? Maybe. Also, you'll get to join us for our movie nights. We had another recently where we broke down the 1992 Afro-pessimistic hip-hop classic, Fly By Night. It was pretty much a 2-hour trigger warning episode. I also decided we're adding an additional fun movie night for my birthday next month. So go to patreon.com/BitterLakePresents, and for as low as $30, you can join in the fun. Also, last Thursday, we had some people involved in saving the Wood Street homeless encampment in West Oakland, California, where I used to live. MT will be putting the link in the chat to their GoFundMe. If you have the means to support, do it. One last bit of housekeeping. We are finally doing a fantasy football league on TIR. This coming Monday, we'll be hosting our first ever TIR fantasy football draft during our Leftist Sports podcast, Beyond the Red Zone. All that being said, let me bring in my homie, my co-host, my dog, the man who has his own show. It'll be going on tomorrow, live for patrons. They'll be able to call in and actually interact with Pascal. So please welcome the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
We have a good show tonight.
We have a great show tonight. I'm very very much looking forward to the show.
And to help us,
tomorrow's my hour as well.
The Mount. Let's bring in the rest of the crew before we even bring that up, because I think that's actually going to be a real good one too. Helping us out with foreign policy is everyone's favorite history professor at Missouri State University, me, Jean Bajlan.
Greetings. Good to be here. Good to see everybody. Everybody's looking fresh-faced and bushy-tailed, or all that stuff.
And also, maybe the most prolific moderator here in Left Media, also the disembodied voice of reason, M. Toussaint.
Hello.
Now, as I said before, we're constantly adding shows to the channel. Toussaint and I talked the other day. I had this great idea, and I was like, Toussaint, you need your own show. She was like, damn right, I need my own show.
You'd be surprised how many people love to crack.
So Toussaint, Starting in September, we'll have her own show. If you guys don't know, pretty much every Wednesday we air one of our TIR Present shows. One of our shows, Movie Night Extravaganza, finally hit 1,000 subscribers on their channel. So shout out to Forrest, Conan, and J. Andrew World. Jean Bajlan is also adding a new member to his Gaming Materialist crew. That show is also doing very, very well. Gaming from a leftist perspective. And tomorrow night, we're doing the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert. And what is the topic, Pascal?
Tomorrow we're going to challenge and inquire, why is the Black church not being dispatched to fight Christian nationalism?
I didn't know we were allowed to ask them to do anything.
You didn't know that?
No.
As soon as Pascal said that, I started getting all these Black church people in my Instagram feed. So I started forwarding Pascal Black church people to get him fired up.
Did they have hats? They had hats.
No, they were shouting so hard the hats just flew right off.
There we go.
Can I just say, Pascal, You're looking very young, very fresh today. Like you're ready for your school picture. And Jason, you look like you're gonna pick him up after school. That's what you look like.
So you said I look like a dad.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I am a dad.
I mean, I guess.
I'm always a dad. Even when we were out in New York, I'm a dad. Remember we were hanging out in New York and I'm, always as I
screaming at the rat.
Yes.
You were a dad.
I was a dad. Only real dads scream that high pitched.
I can still hear it.
Someone says Jason looks like he has a van. I do not have a van. I have a Hyundai.
You do.
I had a van and I lived in it. So there's that. That's a true story. But before we bring in Danny Bessner, we made a quick intro video to get you guys ready for the topic tonight, which is a spicy one: the end of American empire.
Take our message of hope and growth for every American, to every American. I will keep America moving forward, always forward, for a better America, for an endless, enduring dream and 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
Are we approaching the last days of the United States as the ruler of a global empire? Is the proliferation of U.S. military bases throughout the world enough to stave off the soft economic power of China? What would a post-American world look like? We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
But it is worth every effort. Our coalition will stay until our work is done.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Please welcome the co-host of American Prestige and the author of the great piece, Empire Burlesque, which we'll be talking about. Also, word on the street is he's working on a book on the make-believe music genre called grunge. I said it. It's not real. It's not a genre. It is a style of clothes. And I said it. Please welcome, coming all the way live, Danny Bessner. Uh-oh. Your sound's out.
You're muted.
Oh no, what happened?
Oh no. Cuba.
Deep state got him.
Cuba,
Yeah,
why would you do that? Well, look, while he's working.
Okay,
on
here we go.
There
So
we go.
the intro music sounded like Melvins crossed with Ministry.
I'll
Very,
take it.
very Melvins-y vibe. I've been listening to a lot of their like mid-'80s stuff.
I will take that. I will definitely take a Melvin's Ministry comparison.
Combo.
You
That's
can
sort
call
of
me so many
sludgy,
words.
but then the drums were like a little more Ministry-y. That was cool.
Look. You could have been like,
Sludgy.
it sounds like Five Finger Death Punch or some shit like that. So I will, and I'm a Melvin's fan.
Yeah, they're awesome. Melvins are really good, really underrated.
Hella underrated.
Yeah.
But don't talk to Buzz about politics. Avoid that one at all costs.
I like Buzz. Whatever his opinion is, I'm in favor of it.
Uh-oh.
Well, we'll have an off-air conversation.
I'm like, don't co-sign that.
We'll have an off-air conversation.
Read the
that will
paperwork
definitely
first.
make you chuckle. But Danny, we're approaching the end of a century of U.S. global dominance. And this is a quote from your article. For the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States confronts a nation whose model, a blend of state capitalism and Communist Party discipline, presents a genuine challenge to liberal democratic capitalism, which seems increasingly incapable of addressing the many crises that beset it. China's rise and the glimmers of the alternative world that might accompany it make clear that I should probably talk more about that. American century is in its final days. It's not obvious, however, what comes next. Are we doomed to witness the return of a great power rivalry in which the United States and China vie for influence, or will the decline of U.S. power produce novel forms of international collaboration? So, is this the end of the U.S. empire as we know it, Danny?
Oh, I think a couple things that you have to delineate. So the American century is an ideological project which is connected to, I think, the literal material American empire, but is not synonymous with it. So one could have the end of the American century, but still have a continuing American empire. And that's I think, what's probably going to happen in the short, perhaps medium term, is that the ideological component of the American project is just very difficult for people to believe in at this point. But the power can still remain, because I think that this actual empire, we were talking before air about Daniel Bessner's How to Hide an Empire, and he talks about the base system. The actual existing 750 military bases, drone surveillance, things like that, don't actually need that many people to run them. So unlike in the past with the British and Roman empires, we needed actual people to run things, you could actually maintain a globe-spanning empire without too much input. So I think we're going to see something along those lines. But that doesn't mean that, China's rise, I think, does have a particular effect in probably leading to the United States broadly retreating, or at least being non-hegemonic in the shorter term, from East Asia. So you'll still have U.S. domination of most of the global political economy. You'll still have the United States be the hegemon. You'll still have the United States basically control the Western Hemisphere. Obviously, there are limits on all those, but broadly speaking, they're correct, while not being dominant necessarily in East Asia or parts of Eastern Europe. But I still think that the empire itself is probably going to continue for a while.
Daniel, I want to say that I was very much impressed with your piece. I liked your argument very much, and I think it's very salient to have a voice in the mainstream publication bring forth the question as to whether or not American empire is on a perennial decline. The question I want to ask you is that you cite two phenomenon that have arisen in the last 6 years as kind of benchmark, as two signs that the empire is in decline, or America as a hegemon in a downward spiral. One of them is the rise of China, and the other thing, which I found interesting, was the rise of Trump and the rise of Trump as a presidential force. What I find interesting in terms of your belief that Trump signals a certain decline in the traditional liberal democratic order is that we've had other guests on the show, for example, Corey Robin, who tried to make the argument that Trump does not represent a profound uh, uh, deviation from the standard normative governance of the liberal democratic order, and to recognize him as some kind of massive, like, threat or challenge to the system does him more of a service than he merits. I'd like to hear your position on. I mean, China, I think it's obvious is why people feel this, but why do you feel that the rise of Trumpism and Trump itself is a benchmark or a weather vane as to the decline of American empire?
Well, a couple of things. I think Corey's broadly correct that, at least when we're talking about foreign policy, while in office, Trump really didn't deviate from much of the consensus. The military spending went up, the bases remained. The United States maybe didn't get involved in any formal wars, but a lot of the conflicts that were extant kept on just going, and money was given to the military industrial complex, etc. But I do think that there was a difference, at least discursively and rhetorically, and thus ideologically, is that Trump really didn't express some sort of post-Cold War Madeleine Albright-esque commitment to the beauty and glories of American global leadership. In a sense, he de-exceptionalized U.S. history in a real and serious way. So that is different. Barack Obama wouldn't have done that. None of the Bushes wouldn't have done that. Neither would have Clinton, et cetera, going back all the way, basically for all of U.S. history. So it did at least demonstrate that this sort of consensus ideological politics is fraying. Now, the question, though, is materially, that probably doesn't really matter very much. But it does signal a shift, and particularly if we're thinking in the medium and long terms, European leaders probably don't think that they could, quote unquote, rely on the United States as much in the past. That might be to the good. It might be getting rid of NATO or transforming it in a radical direction where Europe really controls its own defense. But there are also negative aspects to it, like the ending of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreements. But it showed that the ship of state is wobbly at the very least, and that's definitely important.
So I want to kind of follow up on that in terms of the ideological framing of American foreign policy. So, one of the things you discuss in your article is the history of the emergence of liberal internationalism as a hegemonic force in American foreign policy making. And so what I kind of understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there is kind of a hangover in the sense that America's material position in the world becomes quasi-hegemonic, but it is only later that that ideology of liberal internationalism and American-led global order becomes the dominant framing in American foreign policy during the Second World War and then during the Cold War era.
Can I just make a very quick point, Gene, because I think you'd be interested in this in particular.
Yeah.
I don't think the liberalism is really that important or that interesting, kind of the fig leaf ideology. What's more interesting is the progressive era part of it. That to me is far more fascinating. The idea that you could control IR, that to me is much more important at a foundational level than like the liberal sheen or mask that is put over American imperial management. I think what's interesting about Wilson is he believes you can manage international affairs. And that to me is so interesting and so wild and so crazy. Could we curse? We could curse, right?
Yeah, we can curse.
Yeah. So that's just a wild belief to me. And I mean, like we could criticize liberalism and its hypocrisy till it's blue in the face. Liberals are hypocritical, blah, blah, blah. But the idea of management is more interesting to me.
So in that sense, it's not an accident that this ideology really takes off during the sort of heyday of the New Deal, where there's a whole ideological sort of belief that rational management of capitalism is possible. So you would say this is a kind of counterpart to that. There's a technocratic methodology to foreign policy.
Technocracy is not quite correct because that implies a form of almost Taylorist management. It's not real. It's just like it's almost like a philosophical belief that you could control the uncontrollable. It's really that, because I mean, social science in a lot of ways, it's like reading the augurs. The augur is reading the entrails. But it's in many cases a fig leaf for a form of imperial management. But Americans never really thought they could manage things to that degree until Woodrow Wilson and sort of the fact that a political scientist became the head of state. Like America they were really the first to elevate the experts in an institutional way, which is really
What would you say
interesting.
about Teddy Roosevelt, though?
In what sense?
As far as managing foreign lands.
He didn't have that same ideology as Wilson. I mean, he was a classic great power guy. He believed in power. He believed in masculinity. He believed in domination and sort of the white burden of civilization. But he didn't have the same progressive outlook in the same way. He did have some sort of like pro-bureaucracy, anti-machine politics, but he was on the right side of the progressive spectrum. And it was really the center and the center left that emphasized the importance of something like social science in that progressive.
Are you calling Woodrow Wilson are you calling him a progressive or a progressive for his time, or what do you
No, it's a technical term, literally just a progressive. The progressive capital P movement refer to like a particular constellation that had both right and left wing variants and centrist variants. That's what I mean. Over time, it came to basically mean like vaguely left wing, but I'm using it in the technical progressive era sense.
So how is that being challenged now? And is, you
Not
present
really.
well, you mentioned some of the alternative groups
Sure.
that are in DC. So what's the at least the, even if it's not even close to hegemonic, what is the alternative that is being presented to this framework, which is apparently, in decline now?
Yeah, broadly speaking, well, just to underline what you said, Gene, it's really not hegemonic. It is very much a minority position, especially within DC. The average, DC foreign policy person is a liberal internationalist, whether more left-wing variants, which are called confusingly liberal internationalists, or right-wing variants like neoconservatism, which is a form of liberal internationalism. But basically, I think you see a melding in one might call the opposition. So you have a left-wing socialist variant, of which I would say I'm broadly representative. And it sort of comes from a more materialist understanding and more historicist understanding with centering history. Then you have a more right-wing variant, which I think takes two groups. There's libertarians, the classic anti-statist libertarians. And then there's realists who kind of are sui generous a little bit, but let's say more conservative, center right, and they basically believe, and then also historicist understanding, but a more tragic understanding of human nature. Whereas a socialist would believe that humans are prone to cooperation, or at least under the right material circumstances would be prone to cooperation. A realist essentially has a tragic view of human nature, where humans have like a will to dominate or things along those lines, and that ultimately you'll never really end war. But that's broadly organized around a philosophy called restraint, which really people agree on when it comes to the Middle East, kind of like this is where it historically emerges from, an anti-US being in the Middle East position. So all the members of that coalition of restraint basically believe the U.S. shouldn't be as involved in the Middle East, emergent from Afghanistan and Iraq, not as much of a surprise, Libya, Syria. But there are disagreements within the restraint camp over what's going to be the next great foreign policy battle, and that's the U.S. versus China, where again, leftists like myself, more skeptical, broadly part of an anti-imperial tradition, and realists like John Mersheimer being more into confronting quote-unquote China and the U.S. remaining hegemonic in East Asia. And then libertarians probably actually mostly fall on the anti-imperialist side of that equation.
So, adding to that then, so what is going to be the policy outcome of the fact that this opposition to, the liberal internationalism, and I think it's very important to underline the point that you made, that whether we call it neoconservatism or whether we call it, liberal humanitarian intervention, even though their rationales are formally different, the policy end result is the same. What is going to be the outcome of that? Because I can foresee, for example, in East Asia, where China really is growing as a power, but there's a kind of contradictory force to that, in that as China becomes more and more powerful within East Asia, China's neighbors are perhaps going to become more and more inclined to the United States as a counterbalance to, is this like extremely dangerous? Do you think is there a chance of this can lead to a hot war? Because there are not only, I guess, the ideological imperative of these liberal internationalists wanting to maintain American global hegemony, but there's also a regional dynamic which could be used as a methodology to keep the United States in. The way you get ahead in DC is to, do the pro-imperial stuff, but do it in a woke way where you're saying, but actually we need to defend, why aren't you listening to Taiwanese and Vietnamese voices? And, we have to defend their agency vis-a-vis China, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the argument you made at the end is sort of the argument of a left internationalist, which is just not really a position. I mean, in the sense that there's no, I mean, it is a sort of position abstractly, but there's no material basis for it. It's not like there's a left-wing international actually making decisions in a meaningful way that has broad legitimacy and broad enforcement. So I essentially don't take that position when we're talking this register that I mean, morally it's a serious position, but when we're talking policy, I don't think it's really kind of like arguing about something that's it's not an analytical position because it's not existent in the world, But I do think that you're right, broadly speaking, is that sovereign nations are not going to want their sovereignty impinged upon by China. China hasn't really done an extraordinary amount to actually do that yet. So you actually have all the nations in the region wanting to trade with China, having very tight trade relationships with China, and they don't want the United States to do anything that would jeopardize that. But obviously, that could change, or there could be other forms of influence that become dominant. I'm not sure that China wants that sort of form of imperial politics. I think they definitely want to be hegemonic, but I'm not sure they want to do full-on American dollar diplomacy type domination. Maybe they do, TBD. But either way, I don't think the United States is going to fight World War III over it, and I don't think it's going to fight World War III over Taiwan or anything. And I think if China begins to become more aggressive, as it very well may in 30, 35 years, maybe earlier, the United States is effectively going to cut and run without a plan. So if I were thinking in the real world, from what I would want to do is sort of foster a security transition where in a meaningful way and not be reliant on the United States. It's going to eventually just cut and run because there's ultimately not that much of an American interest in remaining dominant in East Asia forever. Also, it's materially impossible. So I don't think there's going to be a war. I mean, it's it's not enough of a vital interest to risk World War III. It just isn't. I'm not actually that worried about an actual war breaking out, particularly the fact that the United States, unlike the US and Soviet Union, the United States and China are incredible trading partners with each other. By some measurements, I believe they're their most viable trading partner. So I think what you're going to have is a ratcheting up on both sides of tensions, but that's basically to fund the military industrial complex as opposed to fight an actual war, which is also semi-impossible in the age of nuclear weapons, like a full-on World War II type war between great powers. So yeah, that's what I take on that.
There's a fact that you demonstrated in your article that I found rather fascinating. That to me is one of the greatest portentions of what the nature of the Western global liberal elite empire paradigm is that you state that in 1990, the overall GDP of the G7 nations, the seven basically wealthiest nations in the United States, was somehow somewhat over 65% of overall global GDP. Yet in 2020, the G7 nations have less than 35% of the overall global GDP. That fascinated me, quite frankly, to demonstrate that besides all of the political rhetoric that we can discourse, all of us here being some level of dialectical materialists, when you get down to brass tacks, one of the reasons why empire is falling apart is that they just don't control as much of the economies of the world as they did in the past. Is there any truth to that? Can you elaborate on that, if you will?
Sure. It's why it's shittier to be an American today than it was to be an American earlier. There's less of you to consume and there's less to basically redistribute. And I think that's a consequence of that. The problem, though, is that, it seems like we're going to be able to tolerate significant amounts of inequality at home and still be able to maintain global dominance. So why the material sources of the type of empire that you had really at its height between 45 and 75, an incredible explosion in American consumption of literally everything, that is going to the benefits aren't as strong now as they once were because of that material basis being undermined.
No, but the thing is, though, what's important to me about those facts is that what that demonstrates is that there's a certain precarity to international finance capital in light of the fact that overall growth potentiality is limited by these numbers. That causes a situation where how exactly is if we are saying that the United States is diminishing its capacity as a global manager, China is rising, but we still don't know if we're going to be having a new kind of geopolitical paradigm of economic management. What is going to be the economic order that manages these contradictions, and how exactly is it going to be done in a way to minimize the suffering that is a logical consequence of these contradictions playing out over time?
I mean, as Marx predicted, you see the rise of a global bourgeoisie. So I think it's going to be managed. You've already seen that sort of transition to different finance capitals around the world and forms of sovereignty given to financial organizations, kind of like we're given, Gene, I'm sure you're aware, um, given your own work to like these late modern companies, you know. So I think you're seeing a return to some forms of financial governance, but I think that it's going to be managed. It's so complex. It's going to be managed at different nodes. It's going to be managed in state capitals when it comes to the security, and it's going to be managed in international financial institutions and multinational corporations and high finance groups in other spaces. All working, whether they know it or not, in concert to maintain this global system.
But do you see, for example, a lot of people on, or at least certain elements of the left, are celebrating, let's say, the decline of American empire and the rise of potential, a multipolar world that people talk about. Do you think, not just, I think you lay out a very good argument in your piece about the human cost of American empire, and that this kind of notion that, well, if it wasn't America, somebody else would do a far worse job. I think that doesn't, that kind of argument that doesn't hold water. But do you think there is a risk of, with American decline, a move to a even more chaotic global order in which we return to something that looks, let's say, like the late 19th century, where you have competing imperial
nuclear
blocks?
weapons. It's such a paradigmatic shift that you can't return to that sort of 19th century European great game of empires. That and also capitalism is one. So we're effectively all part of a global system already. So I think there's like antibodies almost the system has produced to defend that sort of great power rivalry where there's legitimate different economic systems coming into contact with one another. I think that the ruling elites of the various capitals resemble themselves much more than the Ottomans and Russians and British and Americans actually did at the time, particularly the bourgeoisie. So I don't see that happening. I actually think might be more damaging in the short term, but it's hard to know because American imperial action has been pretty bad. But I do think almost from a philosophical level, it's just like people in a region are better able to determine their fate than people outside of a region. They have a real organic connection to the space and the culture and everything. And I just believe that almost as a philosophical principle, like why sovereignty is a good thing. So basically, I think there's much to be gained from this sort of thing.
But there is a danger, I think, that is hinted at about, not so much from this multipolarity then, but from the Americans wanting to hang on because of the
most definitely
ideological hangover.
Yeah, I think that's will be more damaging for quote unquote allies and partners of the United States than the United States itself. That the United States, I think, it will cut and run the second it wants to, and that's as has happened in the past, likely to leave people in the lurch. I mean, just look at Afghanistan. They left, and now all of the issue of debt and things along those lines. So it'll be worse for non-Americans, I think, in that situation. Yeah.
So one of the
it's likely to happen. Yeah, sorry.
I want to ask you, Daniel, is that has the stewardship of the United States over global affairs suffered because of incompetence or incapacity in terms of the results that you highlight in your article, going from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya, even going into during the Cold War period, where we believe that we had these periods of peace, when in reality, all of the third world, iterations of overthrows that we supported had major consequence. The way you paint the American stewardship of global empire from the Cold War period into today is basically catastrophe management, to some extent. Now,
Yeah.
is that the
Oh, sorry.
product of do you think this is because if you look at the rhetoric that the ruling class and the power elite use, for example, in our clip, we had Bush the father making it sound like America, the shining city on the hill, and the new world order, and we shall carry on the eagle and the cloud and the sky and the sun and the Bible and God should all of that rhetorical flourish and crap that we're all used to hearing. But when you look with your record that you put forth in your article, it's been an absolute catastrophe. How do we reconcile that?
I mean, I think the project was doomed from the beginning. I mean, I don't think American imperial managers were particularly incompetent. I just think you can't be an imperial manager successfully. I think that you can't be a liberal empire. It just doesn't work that way. So that's what I would say, is that the whole, what's the legal term of fruit of the poison vine? It's not surprised that it's not a surprise that the poison vine flowered rotten fruit is what I would say. I think the theory of management is wrong. The theory of liberalism is wrong. The theory of how human beings act is wrong, and the theory about military power's ability to shape the world is wrong. So on every perspective, it's just doomed from the beginning, in my opinion.
Tucson, I know you had a question you wanted to ask Daniel.
Trying to catch me sleeping?
Yes.
Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you answered quite a few of them actually already. I was interested in multipolarity and if it was even desirable as on the left.
For a guy that has a podcast, Daniel answers questions very fast, which is funny. He's the opposite of most of us that get off on hearing ourselves talk. So
I hate hearing myself talk.
Well, okay, you're knee deep in all of this news. It's sometimes a downer for us to hear about, but you are so much more immersed in it. Is there some current situation that you despair over? Not in your personal life, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think it's unlikely we're going to make the changes necessary to push in a good direction. You guys all know the manifesto. We're mutual ruin of the contending classes. Marx always said that was an option if we don't get communism, and we might be in the era of mutual ruin. It's hard to at this moment see otherwise. And it's not just because like Bernie didn't win. It's just because like consumer capitalism as a system is so damaging to people spiritually and to the world environmentally. And I think the real moment was the teens and 20s. Like that was the moment when things could have gone in a different direction and they didn't. I think like we're seeing that more and more. So yeah, I guess that's what I despair over.
So it's like in Fist of the North Star when the guy gets punched and he's dead already, but he doesn't know he's dead for another 2 minutes, and then his head explodes. We're heading down. I mean, like one of the most terrifying things in your article, and I think also has to be highlighted, is the point you make about like how easy and how little manpower is required to manage empire, right? Do you think our ability as, let's say, citizens or residents of the United States to actually have any popular effect on foreign, we just have no ability to resist the military-industrial complex because it's insulated from the population? Do you see that as being like the technical problem that we haven't overcome?
I mean, a responsible strategic left would look at how power functions and attack that. It's not been done. Many reasons. Many people are saying there are many reasons for this, but there not only has it not been done, it doesn't seem like there's any real appetite for it. So I just don't know.
Why can't we?
I could be wrong, right? Like my power analysis could be totally wrong.
But
and maybe
why can't the left do it? Why can't they? What don't they understand? Do you think? What do you think the left is not understanding about the power industrial complex and its ability to maintain empire?
Well, I think the left was consciously destroyed at mid-century by the American state, variance, cross-racial variance, cross-class variance. So institutionally, the thing was destroyed. So I don't blame the left, but I think that there's almost an interest in tactics over strategy. There's an interest in particular, I think, models of resistance that don't really work. And I think that this is a hyper knowledge focused techno social structure that manipulates a very particular algorithm, and that we would need to get people into like highly technical positions to manipulate the algorithm that we just don't, or change the constitution, which so one of those seems more likely than not. Because I mean, like, even how would a mass mobilization call a constitutional convention? And how would a constitutional convention, it would be the Constitution by Monsanto and Amazon. And also, you can't challenge the state militarily. Also, a lot of the revolutions of the early 20th century happened when people were actually starving. And it seems like things along the lines of the Green Revolution and cheap calories prevent that. I think you're going to see the legalization of more vices. So there's a ton of obstacles that just don't seem like they're on the verge of being overcome.
Damn. So PlayStation, weed,
PlayStation, cocaine, and more free porn is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, these things matter socially. I think it would be wild to, not that I'm against them or anything like that. I'm just saying, when you're looking at when revolutions happen, it's when like very, very basic wants aren't met, and we have all of our most basic wants met, and then some.
It's funny you say that, because we were getting ready for this show and we were doing, we kind of do press for it David Four and David Feldman's show. And constantly we're kind of hit with these maybe more liberal talking points. I don't know how you feel about it, Pascal. And one of them was, is this the tipping point of the end of like late stage capitalism? All these different phrases people like saying. And
they've been calling it late stage for over 100 years, just so you know. Capitalismus was the term in the teens and 20s.
I actually said, I was like, I don't think it's a late stage. And I said something very similar to you about the fact that, you know, as long as people have the ability to go on Twitter and get free porn, you know, it's really hard to build a revolution when you don't have anything. And it's interesting to me to see people that always look to past movements, El Salvador, Cuba, even China to a certain degree. It's like, well, these things existed in a different time, a very different world than we have here. Why do people cling on to these as we're talking about the left and the inability of a left to do anything?
I mean, I think the left is ultimately a subcultural phenomenon, and that most of its members who take it seriously are generally of a particular class. I mean, as am I. I'm not judging anyone at all for that, but it just doesn't seem to have an organic basis in the working class, which the whole theory is that they're the subject object of history, able to, you know, seize the means of production and move it in a humanistic direction. So it just seems like we're not on the verge of that. And then so you have basically this minoritarian political perspective that, like, everything in our culture has become hyper neoliberalized and effectively becomes one identity among others. Some people like the Yankees, other people like the left. That's all there is to it, but I think that's a particular amount. And so you identify more with this subculture than you do with any sorts of political strategy. And like, you know what? I understand that, because the left has been systematically destroyed. I mean, I think if there's no Cold War and there's no literal US state effort to destroy an entire political perspective, things would be different. But that's, what is it? We make the world, men make the world, but they're not born. And I forget the quote, but you know, the famous quote is that we make the world, but
not under conditions of their choosing or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, does this get into what you and I were talking about a little bit off air, and what I've been talking about too much as I'm trying to write this video essay script, that we're currently living in this stage of I shouldn't say stage, and I shouldn't say currently, because I think it's been going on as long as wrestling's been going on. This idea of kayfabe, especially, I think it plays out in the way we look at politics as theater. Everything we're discussing right here, you don't really hear too much in mainstream news media. I mean, your analysis of the U.S.'s relationship with China sounds very different than what I watch. If I'm even watching some leftist shows, there's always some sort of fear of World War III. Definitely, people were even mentioning here on the chat, well, Trump bombed Iran and almost caused a war with Iran. I think this is all a part of the political burlesque that plays out for Americans to glom onto their good guy, bad guy narrative.
Which
Jean,
makes
what is
sense. They have no effect on. I mean, like it's not wacky to be disconnected from this. Like, why would you? You have one life to live. Why would you obsess over something that basically you don't have any impact on?
Well, Daniel, I want to push back against you, towards you on a simple point here. That though is that
Please.
as much as we're saying that things are out of control and the international empire is rolling along in this direction, there are some people who believe that within the last 6 months we've had a major international conflagration with the effects of Ukraine in terms of the Russia-Ukraine scenario. I mean, this was being painted as potential World War III, super clash of superpowers, so on and so forth. I mean, you mentioned the Ukraine Russia situation in your article, but it's really an afterthought in terms of the overall larger play. Can you elaborate your position on that, please?
Sure. It's not important when we're thinking about geopolitical structures, which is what the piece was focused on, and particularly when we're talking about U.S.-China relations. This is not in any way an excuse. I have to, that for Putin's invasion, I do not think it was caused by NATO expansion. I do think NATO expansion played a role in shaping the security environment, but Putin had many other reasons relating to his own historicity, his own personal psychology, his own desire, domestic politics, which is probably the most important thing to launch that invasion. But regardless, and the invasion is terrible, and there have been a ton of war crimes and everything like that. It just doesn't really affect the global political structure. Ukraine and Russia are border nations that have a long, complex history. It doesn't really destabilize any of Eastern Europe in any meaningful way. It's horrible what's happening. It'll create a bunch of refugees, and a ton of people are. I just want to underline the war is absolutely terrible. But the essay was focused on larger geopolitical structures, and I just don't think it's that important in terms of that topic.
The economic consequences of the geostrategic moves to isolate Russia that the United States have played, and the ramifications that's played out economically, is something.
I think we're already seeing the system rebalancing. It didn't last very long. I think the system and its prerogatives and pressures are going to basically allow people to consume as much as possible.
I think also there's another point to put forward here is as well, even when you do have these political crises brought about by deteriorating economic systems, there's no alternative. Look at the Arab Spring. What happened in the Arab Spring? You had all these terrible situations. You had revolutions, and then basically either the revolution ended up in civil war, endless civil war, or in just another counter-revolution and the return of neoliberalism in another form. And I think another point on the Russia-Ukraine war, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, is that even if China, as the sort of main challenge to the United States, is favorably inclined towards Russia more than the United States, why would they support? China is actually very responsible. They don't want to see border changes.
What China and the U.S. both want is Syria and Ukraine, basically to occupy Russia and to ensure that it doesn't challenge them in any way. That's what I think. There have been links like that. That's what I think. Like the people who want the war, and there are people on both sides probably just want it to end. They want stability. There's definitely contingents that just want Syria there, effectively, Gene. That just want a permanent way, test out weapon systems, just destabilize, occupy Russia for years and years and years, ensure that the United States remains dominant economically. China ensures that Russia will give it no problems and that it could use anti-U.S. sentiment to ally closer with it. That's what I think. But that's mostly related to that region and Russia. But in terms of, I still think the global game is between the U.S. and China. Russia's a middle power.
Well, That's
Toussaint, you want to add something?
Actually,
You're
I
just
just
eating
wanted.
popcorn watching the show, aren't you?
Oh, well, I'm modding. I'm still modding. I wanted to thank you for being so generous with us. I know that Harper's check was pretty cool. Thank you for giving us access to HBO, Showtime, and all these other channels by giving Jason your username and password. You did on purpose, right? It was very nice of you.
well, like it's all pretty gloomy, Daniel. I mean, I'm a doomer, but like you always outdoomer me. Do you see?
I just think it's realistic. I mean, I think like capitalism like just won.
I mean,
How
I
could you
don't
deny that.
I mean, my personal take, and maybe you disagree. I think like when World War I broke out and the working class failed to like resist their imperial powers, their home countries and murdered each other across Europe. I think that was like the beginning of the end of a dream of socialism. And I do sometimes feel that we're just living in this like contending ruin, and it is very difficult to perceive of a way out. But I guess the first thing you have to, because like I think something that, for example, even like the moderate social democrats don't think about is that like when Bernie was running, let's say Bernie got into power, okay, and he did some domestic reforms like the healthcare, like the education. There was no real articulation of like what an alternative American foreign policy would be. Like, if you want to play like electoral politics, there's just like there's no conception of what even how would you go about winding down empire. We just end up with nothing between liberal interventionism and then, well, let's just wait for the international proletarian revolution, which is kind of like millenarianism, right? So we I think one thing you really have to, you're right in emphasizing is like we don't know what we don't know when it comes to changing the international structures. So is there any first step that you would think would be necessary if we were even going to begin to address this problem of the left's failure to understand foreign policy and its implications?
Like education, I guess. I don't know. Podcasts. Subscribe to American Prestige.
There you go.
That's the only way forward. That is a true path.
I do want to shout out Derek Varn, who's actually going to be our guest for Saturday. He says this has been a great reality check. He gave us a super chat, so shout out. He was agreeing with you in the chat, Dr. Bessner.
Daniel, my question to you, and I know we've had conversations before about your theory about mass politics, about how mass politics in the contemporary age is relatively futile. I actually have a piece I've been working on for a while challenging that, because my question is that if mass politics is so futile, why is it working so well for the right? Because that's actually the tactics they're using to organize their base in getting what they want to get achieved.
But they exert power through the undemocratic constitution in the Supreme Court.
Well, why exactly do we have to be attached to bourgeois liberal democratic forms in the means of where we organize this? Because we have to be on the left.
So protest.
I mean, your argument is that the right is able to organize because they are able to maximize power over the liberal democratic institutions we have.
No, I think the right has basically adopted a Leninist strategy super effectively for 50 years. That's why
I'm glad you said that. And my position is that, okay, they're taking from our own icons.
They consciously do it. They write about it. They say we're going to study the anarchists in the 1890s. They're just way better at it than the contemporary American left. Partially because the left was destroyed in the 50s. I mean, like we can't
prove my point. Is that it's not so much that mass politics is over; is that mass politics for the left has rendered itself ineffective.
Well, I would define the right as not as an elite focused politics where it matters. I would define them. The Federalist Society and judges is how they've been governing, and that's like super elite.
We literally
Law
said
school.
all this yesterday, Pascal, on Feldman's show. Like literally brought up the Federalist Society.
Yeah, we did. But the thing is, I think that that is a very strong point in part of their organization. But what they're doing at a state level with this implementation of this Bannon strategy of capturing state municipal political machinery.
But that's mostly through gerrymandering and things like that, which is again kind of an elite focused strategy.
But they're
based
still
on, like,
organizing
demographic
individuals
arguments.
and working class people on the ground around their very banal politics. And
Certainly, culture war institutions have gained a lot of money from the working class. I would say. I'd say that's who benefits the most on the right, like the media. That's where a lot of that money is going. I think.
Oh dear, it's well. I mean, like I do see the point that the cultural war takes up a lot of political energy, and there's a lot of money to be made in it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's where I think most of the working class focuses on, much less politics. It's politics is entertainment.
I'm not disagreeing with the overall tragedy of what the right offers. My position is that they're not better they don't have better politics. What I'm saying is that they're using a form of mass politics to support their crass ideology. And so my argument is that that form of mass politics is a form of mass politics. We may not like what they're organizing around, but my position is that the argument that mass politics is incapable of addressing.
But what are you defining as mass politics?
A politics that's rooted in organizing large-scale capacities of individuals who are outside of political infrastructure to implement influence on the current political moment.
But like what specifically?
I would think the fact that Bannon is able to get teachers and people who want to be parts of school boards in municipal areas to say that we are not going to have curriculum in schools in 16 states and have them come out regularly is mass politics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would define that a little more as interest group, but yeah, I mean, that's basically like Bannon from, I don't know the details, but it seems like he's basically taking like an interest group and something that's in their like very specific field and trying to do a politics around it and bring people up. How's that mass? Because it's just ordinary people. Mass politics is the idea that like the demos has like a seat at the table, like fundamentally. Not like that's what people thought about when they were talking about mass politics in the 20s and 30s. It's not like that groups of people come together then affect particular things. It's like the demos like constantly is a part of the political structure. That's what not just like at random moments it sort of like makes its voice heard. That could happen in authoritarian societies. A democratic mass politics is more institutionalized than that, I think. So like Soviets, or something along those, like constant dynamic. The masses have a say.
Well, I mean, I don't think that any particular time in American politics, the constant dynamic of the masses having a say has been the case because of the nature of the way our political infrastructure works in this country. The only time we've actually had the masses,
right? It's never been realized. But in the 20s and 30s, when people developed the category of mass politics, which still basically, I think, provides the discursive framework for how we talk about politics at all. That was a real discussion. This is why the New Deal happened, to prevent it.
That's where I agree with you. And what I'm saying is that those tactics, as you've already admitted, are being used by the right today. And what the problem that I have is that the left is not using our own organizational tactics that the right has picked up on to implement their own rather horrible politics on a grassroots level.
Well, there we go. It's
Gene, what do you think? You usually participate.
My perception is there's sociological reasons why the type of mass politics that you might have seen in the 20s and 30s and 40s, why that type of politics might not be possible in the same way today. Because, for example, when we talk about a working class, when you were dealing with like a working class of industrial capitalism, you were dealing with ranks upon ranks of people who were working closely together.
Right. It's a moment when capitalism had totally won. That's my entire point, right? It's not possible today because of that.
Because today, like, even though you have like a proletariat, like they're all organized over like 30 different Starbucks franchises. Like the only workers that still have like any power, for example, in Britain, it's the railway workers, right? Because they, they still have like that, like they can make like not just for like regular people, but they can actually hurt the ruling class. Because of course, the railways, if you shut them down in London, unless you've got a freaking helicopter, you can't get around London. And so there are fewer and fewer, I guess, nodes of the economy in the advanced countries of the world. I don't know about like the rest of the world, but in the advanced countries of the world, you can where you can like affect change. And I think that is both an opportunity in some ways, because that means that like there is a relatively small element of the working class who could bring the society like to a halt, but at the same time means that like it's very easy to insulate capitalism by like you buy off like particular workers in key industries, or you make sure that they're kept taken care of, and we have a more segmented society. So like I'm not dismissing the possibility, like Pascal says, that we can't have a mass politics, but I think another problem is that the people doing the mass politics are often like the mass politics they're doing is like so they can get into the NGO industrial complex and get a freaking job in either academia or in like like racial sensitivity training or like what have you. So like it's like I feel like we're in like like to be the proletarian revolution. Like my honest opinion is like it would be more likely to start in somewhere like China or where you have like a huge industrial proletariat than a place in the United States where it's like all service sectors, like productivity has been like everything is like services, and there's like very few industrial like concerns. I don't know if people would believe that, but
well, let's we've been here an hour, and Dr. Bessner has he's a busy man, so let's wrap this up.
But I don't want to make this seem like this was antagonistic, because I value your insights.
I like antagonism. Pascal, you always apologize to me. I don't care. I'm a New York Jew. All I do is argue. I'm totally fine.
See, I know my people. That's what I'm talking about, man. Queens, New
not
York,
at all,
in the house.
Man. Please, never apologize. I don't take it personally at all.
A New York Jew in Los Angeles. I smell
the first of those.
I smell a movie script. Or
whoa, are you doing an anti-Semitism?
Yes. I'll be here all week, folks. I'll be here all week.
Someone wants to ask me about AIPAC that they keep on saying, and I just don't know the real answer.
Daniel works for AIPAC.
On AIPAC, Super PAC, and its impact on left progressive electoral strategy. I don't know. It seems like, from what I know about AIPAC, it seems like it made the gamble to kind of just associate with the Republican Party. That seems to have actually been a structural shift in American politics. So
they've been coming out and financing against the progressive candidates.
Yeah,
the Democratic Party.
That's their game.
By supporting right-wing Democrats, though.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like AIPAC. not a lot of surprise there. That's what I think.
Daniel, thank you for taking your time to talk with us.
Thanks,
I really
guys.
appreciate it. Hopefully next time we can get you down to Mexico and we can do a live show.
That'd be fun. Yeah,
beach show.
Everyone comes in. We do a TIR live show in Tijuana. That'd be great.
I got to talk to you about TIR live show in LA.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, that's actually a real conversation. And
just text me.
Up. I was supposed to hit you up yesterday, so
hit me up. We could get David Feldman on. He must be here, right?
No, he's in New York, dude.
Oh, Pacman. Sorry.
Oh, David Pacman.
Yeah.
Is he a Jew?
I would think so. I believe so.
He is.
I thought he was something else.
Argentine.
I think
is he an Argentinian Jew?
He's a spice.
Jew. We should have like an all Jew panel, like an all LA Jew panel.
Oh yeah,
is that
boy.
possible?
Jason, I love the framing, boy. I tell you, boy, you're just laying it on.
I'm
yes,
trying
apparently
to get more Black Israelites to watch.
He's of Argentine Jewish descent, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, so he's a spicy Latino.
But he's got stomach problems.
Oh, well, Argentinians are Germans pretending to be Italians speaking Spanish or something like that.
God
Yeah, it's
damn. Okay,
super
we're
heavy
being way
Italian.
too racist for the regular show. Thank you,
Yep.
Daniel.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
Daniel, this best
Bye.
That was Daniel Bessner. There's links in the description to his latest article, Empire, Burlesque, and Harper's. Also, if you haven't already done it, check out his show, American Prestige. It's actually one of the better shows out there on foreign policy. Daniel and what's his partner's name, Toussaint?
Derek.
Davison.
Derek. I think his partner, Derek, should battle Derek Varn for the use of the name Derek. There can only be one. It's just like Highlander.
I mean, well, Varn is black, so it is a black name.
He is Varn is the internet's answer to Sean King.
I called it.
I was gonna see if Varn wanted to come with us to the after hours because he was talking the chat.
Varn was happy, like he's like,
yes, he must have got home like so frustrated with the world.
You give Vaughn some foreign policies, like finally someone's doing some foreign policy. Hey, have you tried selling people the new merch, Jason?
No. Oh, kind of. I haven't been here. Let's do a look. Let's do this before we go. We have to do this. I got really excited. Jean Bajlan commissioned an image. And I don't know. I think he just did it to do it. And the image that he commissioned was this kind of amazing picture of all of us in the TIR crew. And it's a great picture of Pascal smiling. And I think that's what it's all about. And we made a few things. Not everything isn't even up. Because later this week or maybe next week, shirts of this image should be up. But there we go. Let's check this out. If you go to This Is Revolution podcast, you can see the new merchandise.
There we go. Smiling Pascal.
Look at Robert. Look at him. Look at him. Cosby smile. Look at him.
He looks so happy. He looks so
Picture
happy.
day.
Picture
day. Cuba looks like he's about to abduct someone.
That's how Cuba always looks.
True.
There we go. And we got a cup.
And we also changed the name from Big Black Mug to just Black Mug.
Oh, thanks for telling me.
I think Lady Cobra realized that it said Big Black Mug. Yeah. Okay. Varn's going to come. Okay. Awesome. So if you guys haven't done it already, patreon.com/Bitterlake Presents. We're going to go into the champagne room. Jean Bajlan is going to tell more Argentinian anti-Semitic jokes. Derek Varn's going to yell more about foreign policy and what we don't know.
And I believe it's pronounced champagne.
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 My bad.
It's France. It's Française.
Bay Planner says it looks like a poster for the Communist A-Team. Well, that's just what we are. That's what we are. We are.
Cuba is B.A. Baracus and Pascal is Mr. T. Pascal is you can't be Mr. T, Jason Miles, as much as you might want to be. But
no, I want to be George Papard, dude.
Okay, fair enough.
Pascal has the jewelry.
He does have to. He's Mr. T. He's the Mr. T of TIR. He's the T in TIR.
Pascal is face.
That was face bad.
That's who Pascal is.
That's the next merch we need. The A-Team, TIR A-Team.
You know what would be better than that? TIR as Charlie's Angels.
I don't know what kind of comment you're trying to say with that one, homie.
I'm trying to say that I feel pretty. That's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to say. And on that note, Toussaint.
Yes.
On that note,
we are out.